tell us your timeline for reopening the economy. You've said in an interview that we're about 67% businesses open versus 50% when this whole thing started. What's your timeline for getting to 100%?
Right. Well, we're watching the data right now every day. That we have a lot more real-time data now than we did a few years back, and so you can actually see, what percentage of small businesses are open and so on. And so right now you're seeing a big variation across the states. That in some states, I think North Dakota, we've got 91% of businesses open, and then other states, I think Massachusetts is one of the lower ones at about 50% are open. But I think that we're ramping up, and hopefully we'll get to fully open everywhere in the country relatively soon. I think every state is starting to do that, and some are ahead of others, but some of them are really, really far along.
And you said that you disagree with Chairman Powell on his assessment of when we'll be fully open. Have you shared with him that sentiment? And are you concerned that his language could be sort of a prophetic, driving the markets downward by speaking about such a long timeline?
No, I think that Chairman Powell and I are pretty much on the same page about the challenges and opportunities of the next year. I think that I can't talk about private conversations we might have, but if you look at the Congressional Budget Office, which has published a forecast for the rest of the year, it looks about right to me. And I think that most professional economists would agree that you're going to have a second quarter that's a historically negative number, and then a third quarter that's probably a historically positive number, and then from there we'll probably return to a normal growth path.
But Chairman Powell has said that he thinks that this could be as much as late of 2021 where we're back to normal. Do you think he's speaking too aggressively and too bullish in his language? And would you say that he should be more circumspect in his language?
No, I wouldn't criticize him at all, but I can state the sort of economic question, which is that, if, say, not at an annual rate, the economy drops about 10% in the second quarter, then it comes back, say, about 5% in the third quarter. The question then that economists are debating is how long does it take to get back to 100, where it was, say at the beginning of March. And that's the thing that's pretty uncertain, and that there are a lot of differing opinions about. I think that the Congressional Budget Office expects right now that GDP will be about 5% below where it was when this whole thing started at the end of the year. But I know that there's some people that think that it could be worse than that, and some people that think it could be better. I think Larry Kudlow and I are probably on the optimist side now.
Mm-hmm. And one thing actually that Ed Conard and I have talked about is the age. So the median age of the victim of coronavirus is 81 years old. Mm-hmm. And his suggestion was that we should be focused more on a demographic opening based on demographic characteristics as opposed to a geographic opening. What's your assessment on that in terms of the lives that are being lost are predominantly the elderly, and really focusing efforts on nursing homes and the like?
Well, I think focusing efforts on nursing homes is something that you're seeing governors all around the country, blue states, red states, focus on now. And I think it's very, very important. If you look at the percentage of mortality of deaths that have occurred in nursing homes, it's unacceptably high. And I think that folks are moving forward, hopefully, with a better plan now than they had months and months ago. But as far as what the guidelines for opening are age-wise and so on, the task force has issued its guidelines to the governors, and the governors are making their calls about how to do that safely. And it varies, I think, across states. Some states that have very high density might have different rules than states that are pretty spread out, like Montana.
Mm-hmm. And you've said that the payroll tax cut relief, in your opinion, is not dead yet, that there is a possibility that that might happen in a future coronavirus package. What would be something you'd be willing to give up in negotiations to receive that concession from congressional Democrats?
Well, I'm not the one negotiating. It's President Trump and Secretary Mnuchin. And one thing, I'm an economist, not a negotiator. President Trump is the one that wrote The Art of the Deal. And one thing I've learned from reading the book is that you don't go in and negotiate with yourself before you negotiate with others. And so even if I did have an answer to that question, I don't think it would be good to broadcast it. But I don't have an answer to the question because I'm not negotiating the deal. But what our job as economists in the White House is to list the possible policies and then to analyze what might happen if you do this or that. And we've presented the president with a full range of options.
So, and Art Laffer, Larry Kudlow, and many other economists have said that the payroll tax relief would be a benefit for both workers and for employers, mm-hmm. And provide relief on both sides there. So why do you think Democrats are opposed? What's the economic argument driving their opposition to this?
I haven't spoken with someone, a Democrat, who's opposed, and so I'd have to see what it is that they're concerned about. A natural concern, though, would be that if you cut the payroll tax, then it benefits people who have a job, but you also have to think about what are you going to do for people that are unemployed. And so, any package would have to include things for both sets of people. So I think that I have seen people argue against the payroll tax cut by saying, oh, you're only helping people who are employed, and they need less help than other folks. But the point is that I don't think anyone envisions that the entire package would be only a payroll tax cut.
Well, and to that point on benefits for the unemployed, Casey Mulligan and others have said that the package currently for many unemployed is actually far more generous than they could make if they were working. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that assessment, and do you think that any future package should disincentivize not working?
Right. Well, it's definitely the case that if you look at the extra $600 that people with in some states with some incomes make more currently being unemployed than they would going back to work, and I think most Americans they want to have their jobs back, they want to have their lives back, and so whether that has a big impact on labor force participation is something I think that'll take many years of academic literature to determine. But it is Casey's point is absolutely correct at the margin that there are a whole bunch of workers all around the country that right now, through the end of July, could get more if they don't work. But don't forget, though, that if your unemployment insurance is getting set to run out, then you have to look ahead and think, geez, I need to get a job because my unemployment insurance is running out. So if you reconnect earlier, then you're basically taking a risk-reducing move. And so I would guess that a lot of people would be risk-averse about being unemployed after their unemployment insurance started to run out, and that they'd be heading back to their employer, even though it might cost them $600 to do that.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the inflation, so Alan Blinder has said that we should not be concerned about inflation based on the economic recovery of 2008. And even though a lot of people have said they're concerned about what's happening with asset purchases by the Fed, do you agree with Alan Blinder? Or is inflation something that you're concerned about because of what's been happening? Well,
Alan Blinder is a really great economist, and I respect him very, very much. And I think that what Alan one of the things that studying his monetary work over the years has taught us is that deflation can be a big problem when the economy is declining. And the way to think about the economics of deflation and why it can be like a threat to give you like an extra push downward is that imagine you're a farmer and you borrow money to plant some seed, and then the price of corn is enough so that you'll be able to pay it back and make some money. But then the price of corn drops a lot more than you expected. Then when you sell all your corn, you might not have enough money to pay the bank back. And so when there's a deflation, then what's happening is that businesses who've borrowed money are selling their stuff for less, and it might be that they then start defaulting on their debt. And so deflation can lead to a kind of negative spiral, and it's something the Fed's watching very, very closely. The latest consumer price index number was negative, suggesting that there are some deflationary risks. And against that backdrop, I would guess that that's what Alan Blinder was talking about. Of course, he absolutely would be worried about runaway inflation, but right now, in this downturn, given the latest numbers, the deflation risk is higher than the inflation risk.
Mm-hmm. And he also said in his view that the worry about a deficit is overblown, that's something in the longer term that the U.S. can be concerned about. Are you concerned right now short term about the deficit?
I don't think that if markets were concerned about the short term deficits, and I share his concern about long run deficits, but if markets were concerned, then you would see skyrocketing interest rates because people would be so worried about default and so on. And the fact that we're not seeing that suggests that he's correct to focus more on the long term.
And a lot of Republicans and conservatives are upset at the idea of an additional package for more government spending. Do you think, what's the likelihood, 0 to 100% likelihood of another package, and what would be your response to those concerns?
I'm not sure about the exact number, but I think a lot of people think that there's going to be more legislation. Like it's 100% there's going to be more legislation of some form. There are going to be technical fixes for the small business loan program, the PPP, and I think Secretary Mnuchin and the President probably expect that there'll be a Phase 4 deal as well. But exactly what form it takes is still an open question.
But and in terms of the concerns of additional, quote-unquote, runaway spending, what's your response to Republicans who might not, McConnell has said he's reluctant to do more spending. What's your response to that criticism?
Yeah, I think that so that states that they have a strong opinion about if we have another bill, what should be in it. And of course, the White House will be speaking with them and getting their feelings and, helping, their own opinions be formed by the opinions of others. It's so for sure, like Mitch McConnell said, he doesn't want more than $1 trillion. I don't know if the president hasn't staked out a number yet, but that's how legislative negotiation works, is people start to state their needs and then people respond to the statements.
Mm-hmm. And you have had some people on the left in the media criticize your modeling as far as deaths and reopening and cost-benefit analysis. Can you clear the record from your perspective about
I think I've already done that. I've spoken at length about that. And basically what we've been doing from the beginning, we're still doing it, is taking the best epidemiological models and overlaying the data on top of them and looking to see how they're doing and how they're revising their outlook given what's happened with the data. And that's what we've been doing all along, and is what we're still doing.
One last question. What do you think is sort of the most undertold story right now economically about what's happening?
I think the president mentioned it last night, which is that you're seeing very large variation across blue and red states right now, and the extent to which economies are turning back on. And I think that that's probably the story of the data that's probably most undertold right now.
And can you elaborate a bit more on that from your perspective? What does this variation mean?
Yeah, I think
How should we
the
interpret
variation is striking, that you're looking at, much higher share of businesses open and so on in red states. And so, I think it's noteworthy and something to think about what the impact of it will be going forward.
And so from your perspective, seeing more open in the red states, as an economist, would you say that this has more to do with politics, that this is, or it's what's driving this differential?
I really don't know. I mean, that's something that's the subject of, will be the subject of a lot of study. But it's definitely the case that the economies are picking up quicker right now in places that are opening up. And, our hope is that every state opens up and gets back to normal as quickly as possible and as safely as possible.